June 6, 1944, Omaha Beach, Normandy. Technical Sergeant Robert Woodruff of the 29th Infantry Division pressed his back against the seawall, German machine gun fire raking the sand above his helmet. In his waterlogged pack, alongside ammunition, medical supplies, and field rations, lay something that would prove more strategically significant than any weapon carried ashore that morning. A small glass bottle filled with dark, fizzing liquid. The label read Coca-Cola. What Sergeant Woodruff couldn't have known as he huddled behind that Norman seawall was that he carried the vanguard of an invasion more comprehensive than Operation Overlord itself. While Allied armies fought to liberate Europe from fascism, an American corporation was simultaneously launching the most successful marketing campaign in history. The mathematics of cultural conquest were being written not in battle plans, but in production quotas that would transform European taste preferences, social customs, and economic expectations for generations to come. The transformation had begun 3 years earlier in a boardroom 4,000 miles from any battlefield. On December 8, 1941, just hours after Pearl Harbor, Robert Woodruff, president of the Coca-Cola Company and no relation to the sergeant, issued a directive that would reshape global commerce. Every American serviceman would have access to Coca-Cola for 5 cents, regardless of where in the world military duty took him. The cost to the company would be immaterial. The strategic implications would prove immeasurable. Woodruff understood something that military planners and political leaders had yet to grasp. World War II would not simply determine which nations controlled territory. It would decide which culture, which values, which way of life would dominate the post-war world. Coca-Cola would follow American soldiers into battle, but more importantly, it would remain behind after the shooting stopped. The soft drink that soldiers shared with grateful civilians would become the bridge between wartime liberation and peacetime prosperity. The challenge facing Coca-Cola in 1942 seemed insurmountable. The company had operated internationally since 1906, with bottling plants established in Cuba, Panama, and Canada. But European operations remained limited. The war had effectively closed most international markets. Sugar rationing threatened domestic production. Transportation priorities favored military cargo over commercial products. Yet Woodruff recognized opportunity within crisis. The solution emerged through collaboration with the United States War Department. Coca-Cola would not compete with military logistics. Instead, it would become part of them. The company negotiated unprecedented agreements that classified Coca-Cola concentrate as essential military supply. Technical observers, company employees disguised as military contractors, would accompany American forces to establish bottling plants wherever armies advanced. The soft drink would arrive with the liberators, not as luxury but as necessity for troop morale. By spring 1942, Coca-Cola technical observers were training at military bases across America. These men, most with backgrounds in industrial chemistry and bottling operations, learned to establish production facilities under combat conditions. They studied portable equipment designs, water purification systems, and rapid construction techniques. Their mission extended far beyond refreshing soldiers. They would plant the seeds of American consumer culture in soil prepared by military victory. The first overseas Coca-Cola plants established during wartime followed American advances across North Africa. As Allied forces pushed German and Italian armies eastward through Tunisia in early 1943, Coca-Cola technical observers accompanied supply units, identifying locations suitable for bottling operations. The requirements were simple: access to adequate water supply, electrical power for refrigeration, transportation links for distribution, and security from enemy action. Algiers became the prototype for what would become the Coca-Cola invasion of Europe. The plant established there in summer 1943 produced 30,000 bottles daily using concentrate shipped from Atlanta and local water treated with American purification systems. Soldiers who had not tasted Coca-Cola since leaving the United States discovered familiar refreshment in an alien landscape. More significantly, French civilians encountered their first taste of American abundance. The psychological impact proved immediate and profound. European populations that had endured years of rationing, shortages, and deprivation watched American soldiers casually consume a luxury that seemed to embody everything they had lost. Coca-Cola represented more than refreshment. It symbolized prosperity, optimism, and the casual abundance that characterized American society. Children who had forgotten the taste of sugar fought for empty bottles. Adults marveled at the standardization that delivered identical flavor, whether consumed in Algeria or Alabama. As Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Italy in 1943, Coca-Cola technical observers studied the challenges of establishing operations in a country devastated by war. Italian infrastructure had been systematically destroyed by retreating German forces. Power grids lay shattered. Water systems functioned sporadically. Transportation networks existed only where military engineers had restored them. Yet these obstacles, which would have deterred conventional business expansion, represented opportunities for a company committed to following American armies wherever they advanced. The invasion of Sicily in July 1943 provided the first test of Coca-Cola's European strategy under combat conditions. Technical observer James Patterson accompanied the 45th Infantry Division ashore at Scogliti, carrying portable bottling equipment designed for rapid deployment. Within 72 hours of the beachhead's establishment, Patterson had identified a suitable location, negotiated with local authorities, and begun construction of Sicily's first Coca-Cola bottling plant. The plant itself occupied a damaged warehouse that military engineers had declared suitable for civilian use. Patterson's crew, a mixture of American technicians and Italian workers desperate for employment, installed American-manufactured equipment powered by portable generators. Water came from military purification units until civilian systems could be restored. Transportation relied initially on military vehicles returning empty from supply runs to the front lines. Production began on July 18, 1943, just 8 days after the invasion commenced. The first bottles rolled off the line as American artillery could still be heard in the distance. Sicilian workers, many of whom had lost everything to war, found themselves employed in producing something they had never tasted but quickly learned to appreciate. The symbolism was unmistakable. American forces brought not just liberation from fascism, but opportunity for prosperity. The response from American troops exceeded all projections. Soldiers who had consumed warm water and bitter coffee for weeks lined up for ice-cold Coca-Cola with enthusiasm that surprised even company executives. The psychological boost proved measurable. Unit commanders reported improved morale, reduced disciplinary problems, and increased combat effectiveness among troops with regular access to familiar American products. What had begun as a marketing strategy revealed itself as a weapon of war. More importantly for post-war implications, Italian civilians demonstrated immediate fascination with this American product. Children traded military ration items for empty Coca-Cola bottles, treasuring the distinctive shape and embossed lettering. Adults who had never experienced carbonated beverages discovered the refreshing sensation of effervescence. The elderly, remembering Italy before Mussolini, saw in Coca-Cola evidence that American promises of abundance were real rather than propaganda. By autumn 1943, as Peninsula, Coca-Cola operations Allied forces advanced up the Italian, expanded with military success. Plants established in Naples, Rome, and Florence followed identical patterns. American technical observers arrived with advancing forces, identified suitable facilities, installed American equipment, hired local workers, and began production within days of liberation. Each plant served dual purposes, providing familiar refreshment to American soldiers while introducing Italian civilians to American consumer culture. The standardization that characterized Coca-Cola production proved as revolutionary as the product itself. European manufacturing traditions emphasized local variation, regional preferences, and artisanal techniques. Coca-Cola offered something entirely different. Identical taste, standardized packaging, uniform quality regardless of location. A bottle consumed in Naples tasted exactly like one from Florence or Rome. This standardization, mundane to Americans, represented a fundamental challenge to European assumptions about production, quality, and consumer expectations. As 1943 ended and planning began for the invasion of France, Coca-Cola executives understood they stood on the threshold of unprecedented opportunity. The liberation of Western Europe would open markets containing hundreds of millions of consumers who had never experienced American soft drinks. The infrastructure destruction caused by war created opportunities for American companies willing to invest in reconstruction. Most importantly, the gratitude of liberated populations would provide goodwill that could translate into decades of commercial advantage. The planning for Operation Overlord included provisions that would have seemed absurd to military historians just decades earlier. Among the millions of tons of equipment, ammunition, and supplies designated for the Normandy invasion, Coca-Cola concentrate occupied a classified priority rating. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, had personally approved requisitions for portable bottling equipment to accompany assault forces. The soft drink that Americans took for granted would become an instrument of cultural warfare as decisive as any tank or artillery piece. The complexity of establishing Coca-Cola production in occupied France required unprecedented coordination between corporate executives and military planners. Unlike the opportunistic expansions in North Africa and Italy, the French operation demanded systematic preparation. German forces had controlled the region for 4 years, systematically exploiting industrial infrastructure for their war effort. French bottling facilities, if they existed at all, operated under Nazi supervision using ersatz ingredients that bore no resemblance to genuine soft drinks. Technical observer William Patterson, brother of James, who had pioneered Sicilian operations, received orders in March for the most 1944 to prepare ambitious Coca-Cola deployment in history. His team of 12 specialists trained at bases across southern England, studying aerial photographs of French industrial sites, memorizing German defensive positions that might threaten bottling operations, and rehearsing rapid deployment techniques that could establish production within hours of territorial capture. The equipment designated for French operations reflected lessons learned in Italy. Portable bottling lines designed for combat conditions could produce 5,000 bottles hourly using local water sources and American concentrate. Refrigeration units powered by military generators maintained product quality even in damaged buildings. Most crucially, packaging materials including bottles, caps, and labels were pre-positioned in England, ready for immediate shipment once beachheads secured adequate ports. June 7, 1944, dawn plus 24 hours. While German resistance continued Normand along beaches, Patterson's advance team landed at Omaha Beach, carrying equipment that would establish France's liberation-era relationship with American consumer goods. The scene would have struck pre-war observers as surreal. Combat engineers clearing mines and debris while Coca-Cola technicians surveyed potential bottling sites. Artillery exchanges in the distance while corporate representatives negotiated with French civilians emerging from years of occupation. The first French Coca-Cola plant established during liberation occupied a damaged brewery in Carrington, captured troopers by American par June 12th. The facility's original equipment destroyed by retreating Germans, but its concrete structure remained sound. Patterson's team, working alongside French employees desperate for legitimate employment, installed American bottling machinery while German artillery still threatened the town's outskirts. Production commenced on June 18th, exactly 12 days after D-Day commenced. The psychological impact on both American soldiers and French civilians exceeded all projections. GIs who had survived the Norman beaches discovered familiar refreshment that connected them to home. French workers, many of whom had collaborated with German occupiers out of necessity rather than conviction, found employment that aligned them with liberation rather than oppression. The French response to Coca-Cola revealed cultural dynamics that would shape post-war Europe for decades. Unlike Italians who had embraced American products with enthusiasm born of desperation, French civilians approached Coca-Cola with characteristic skepticism. France possessed sophisticated beverage traditions dating to medieval times. Wine culture dominated social customs. The concept of standardized soft drinks challenged assumptions about quality, authenticity, and regional identity that defined French manufacturing. Yet children proved universally receptive. French youngsters who had endured years of ersatz substitutes and artificial sweeteners discovered in Coca-Cola something they had never experienced. Real sugar, genuine flavoring, carbonation that produced actual effervescence rather than chemical bitterness. The contrast with German-imposed substit dramaticules was so that cola became Coca associated not just with American abundance, but with liberation from imposed scarcity. As Allied forces advanced inland from Normandy beachheads, Coca-Cola operations expanded with military success. Plants established in Cherbourg, Saint-Lô, and Caen followed the pattern established in Italy. American technical observers arrived with advancing forces, identified suitable facilities, hired local workers, and began production within days. Each plant served the dual purpose of refreshing American soldiers while introducing French civilians to standardized American consumer products. The liberation of Paris in August 1944 provided Coca-Cola with its greatest European opportunity. The city that had defined sophistication and luxury before the war emerged from German occupation, economically devastated but culturally intact. Parisians who had maintained their identity despite 4 years of Nazi control encountered Americans offering something unprecedented in European experience. Mass-produced refreshment that sacrificed art for democraticismal tradition accessibility. The plant, established in Paris during autumn 1944, occupied facilities formerly used by German authorities for producing ersatz beverages. The symbolism proved powerful. French workers who had been forced to manufacture artificial substitutes for German consumption now produced genuine American soft drinks for their own liberation. The transformation imposed from scarcity to voluntary abundance embodied everything the liberation promised. Parisian intellectuals initially dismissed Coca-Cola as representative of American cultural imperialism. Editorials in restored French newspapers criticized the standardization that eliminated regional variation. Critics argued that American soft drinks threatened French beverage traditions rooted in centuries of refinement. Yet these intellectual objections carried little weight among ordinary Parisians, discovering that American abundance was real rather than propaganda. The expansion into Belgium and Holland during autumn 1944 demonstrated Coca-Cola's systematic to European liberation approach. Technical observers accompanied advancing forces into Brussels, Antwerp, and Amsterdam, establishing bottling operations that served both military and civilian populations workers, emerging Belgian from economic appreciate. The contrast producing had never tasted but quickly learned to devastation, found employment in plants beverages they between German occupation policies and American commercial and decisive. German authorities had systematically extracted practices, proved stark territories and resources from Occupy support their war effort. American corporations invested resources in occupied territories to build future markets. Germans took wealth from conquered populations. Americans created opportunities for conquered populations to build wealth. As 1944 ended, Coca-Cola operated 17 bottling plants across liberated Western Europe. These facilities employed over 3,000 European workers, produced 200,000 bottles daily, and served both American military personnel and European civilians. The economic impact extended far beyond direct employment. Transportation, construction, maintenance, and distribution created secondary employment for thousands more. Most significantly, these plants established patterns that would define abundance, that Americans took techniques emphasizing efficiency, standardization, and quality control. Management post-war European relationships with American corporations. For granted began re-esh practices that prioritized productivity. Local workers learned American production assumptions about labor relations. The casual over-tradition challenged European. The German counteroffensive in December 1944, aping European expectations about prosperity and opportunity known as the Battle of the Bulge, threatened to disrupt Coca-Cola operations across the region. Plants in Belgium found themselves uncomfortably close to advancing German forces. Yet rather than evacuating equipment, company representatives chose to continue operations, understanding that maintaining production during crisis would demonstrate American commitment to European reconstruction. The resilience displayed during the Ardennes crisis proved prophetic. When German forces retreated in January 1945, they left behind a trail of destruction that included systematic sabotage of civilian infrastructure. Water treatment facilities, electrical systems, and transportation networks lay in ruins. Yet Coca-Cola technical observers discovered something remarkable. European workers who had learned American production methods during the brief liberation period had maintained equipment, hidden supplies, and preserved bottling capabilities despite the chaos. This dedication revealed the deeper transformation occurring across liberated Europe. Coca-Cola represented more than refreshment to populations emerging from years of totalitarian control. It embodied the promise of individual choice, consumer freedom, and economic opportunity that defined American society. European workers who had experienced standardized production, fair wages, and respectful treatment understood they were witnessing an alternative to the authoritarian systems that had dominated their continent. As Allied forces crossed the Rhine in March 1945, Coca-Cola operations expanded into Germany itself. The challenge here differed fundamentally from previous expansions. German civilians had been conditioned by Nazi propaganda to view American products as symbols of decadent capitalism. Moreover, the destruction of German infrastructure exceeded anything encountered in previously liberated territories. Cities lay in ruins, transportation systems had collapsed, and civilian populations faced starvation. Yet American military government officials recognized that reconstruction required more than physical rebuilding. German attitudes toward democracy, capitalism, and international cooperation needed fundamental transformation. Coca-Cola plants established in occupied German cities served this broader purpose. They demonstrated that American corporations sought profit through prosperity rather than exploitation, cooperation rather than domination. The plant established in Frankfurt during April 1945 exemplified this approach. The facility occupied a former German brewery that had been converted to munitions production during the war. American technical observers worked alongside German engineers who had previously designed weapons systems to install equipment for producing soft drinks. The symbolic transformation from instruments of war to tools of refreshment resonated with German workers desperate for alternatives to their recent past. German civilians initially approached American soft drinks with suspicion rooted in years of propaganda conditioning. Nazi authorities had characterized Coca-Cola as evidence of American cultural degeneracy and capitalist exploitation. Yet direct experience contradicted these preconceptions. German workers discovered that American employers provided fair wages, safe working conditions, and opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than political connections. The standardization that characterized Coca-Cola production challenged German assumptions about quality and craftsmanship as profoundly as it had French traditions. German manufacturing emphasized precision engineering, artisanal excellence, and regional variation. American soft drinks offered something entirely different. Consistent quality through systematic processes, democratic accessibility rather than elite exclusivity, and efficiency that prioritized results over tradition. By May 1945, as Germany surrendered unconditionally, Coca-Cola operated bottling plants in 12 German cities. These facilities employed over 2,000 German workers and produced 150,000 bottles daily for both occupation forces and civilian populations. The economic impact provided tangible evidence that cooperation with American corporations offered pathways to prosperity that military conquest had never delivered. The bottles that crossed Omaha Beach alongside American soldiers carried more than refreshment. They carried the blueprint for post-war European reconstruction through consumer capitalism. What began as military necessity evolved into cultural transformation that redefined European expectations about abundance, standardization, and opportunity. Coca-Cola had followed the GIs into battle and remained behind to win the peace, one fizzing bottle at a time. The invasion was complete, and Europe would never taste the same again.